Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, we move on to our next webinar, which is on the role of technology and innovation to revive tourism. And moderating this panel today, here is Paul Richer, Senior Partner at Genesis Digital Transformation. Thank you, Paul, for joining us one more time after OTM. Over to you now.
We're going to be talking about the role of technology in trying to revive tourism, which it won't do on its own, but I'm sure it will help. I've got three panelists with me here today, which I'll introduce in a minute. Let me introduce myself first. I run Genesis Digital Transformation. This is a management consultancy, and we work across the world helping travel companies with their technology. So that's me in a nutshell. Carl, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Carl Jones. I'm based in Singapore. I work for SAP Concur as the head of travel for the region. My role is to really look at how we go to market with our products and services in the region across Asia Pacific. I've been living in Asia now for almost 20 years. I've spent many times over in India. So looking forward to the discussion today. Martin?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, that's fine. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Martin Haber. I work for Travelport. I'm also based in Singapore. I've been in Asia now for 6 years, but before that I was based in Africa for 4 years and the Middle East for 3 years. So I'm definitely a global citizen these days. My role is to look after our partners and commercial relationships throughout South Asia, in particular the India market. Look forward to visiting more often than I have already. I've been a fair few times, but looking forward to being able to travel back there again. And for those who don't know Travelport, we connect, we're a travel commerce platform connecting travel suppliers to travel agencies, operating worldwide for 40 years. So hopefully you know who we are.
Thank you, Martin. And Ankush, tell us about yourself and your business.
Yeah. So my name is Ankush and I am the co-founder for TBO Group, which is the largest B2B travel platform in India, empowering a little more than 25,000 operators across the width and breadth. We also operate in a little more than 100 countries, but however, I'm based in Delhi, and it's been a great experience working with different nationalities, different traveler mindsets, different travel community apart from India. So our motto is technology inspiring travel. So I think, Paul, this is the right subject today for us to discuss. So I would say I'm like the long tail of the travel industry, empowering them with all the supply, be it the airline, the hotels, travel insurance, etc., etc. Yeah.
Thanks, Ankush. That's great. And just to round things off, we've got two Singapore. There's you in India, Ankush, and I'm in London. So we're a good international team. And maybe, Carl, I can start with you, because when we were talking during the week, you mentioned a study that SAP has done about travel sentiment. Before you talk about that, let me just tell you all, if you're watching, if you have any questions you want to ask the panel, do please type them into YouTube, and Shivani will actually then relay them to me, and I can actually ask our panel those questions. Carl, tell us about your travel sentiment survey you did at SAP.
Yeah, sure, Paul. So this is the second annual survey we've done. We use an organisation called Wakefield to reach out to people. We address travellers who usually do 3 or more business trips per annum, and we asked them how they felt about the return to travel, what there maybe their concerns were, where they were looking forward to moving forward. So there was quite a few questions that we asked. There was around about 5,000 travellers globally, around about a third of them in the Asia Pacific region. So it's quite representative. I think the main thing that came through was obviously, no surprise, a real concern around safety while travelling. And that was a real shift from previous years, where people were more talking about the stress of returning from a business trip. This was much more about the stress of actually preparing for the trip and going on the trip. So really, how should organizations begin to think about addressing that duty of care and that safety element when things do go back to relative normal at least. The other element was around that: how do we go about addressing some of these concerns, and what are the tactics and strategies that organisations can follow? So it was very much a survey to try to get to some reasonable outcomes, I would say.
Okay, fine. And it sounds to me, Carl, as though we're talking about information provision, maybe letting people know what's going on in the world. Martin, at Travelport, of course, Travelport's all about the movement of information between, I suppose, for example, airlines and travel agents, and far more besides, but that's an example. Is there a facility within Travelport and other global distribution systems to actually provide information of the kind that might give people confidence to travel?
Well, I can certainly speak to Travelport versus some of the competitors and what they do. But in the case of Travelport, absolutely there is. We had a similar survey to the SAP one, which looked at the safety aspects, 10 aspects of different parts of safety during travel. And interestingly, we found that India actually had the highest ranking in terms of Indian travellers wanting all of those safety and that comfort in understanding safety on their travel and their journey. And so to help with that, we introduced a SmartPort plugin in mid-July, which plugs into our desktop to help the travel consultants at time of booking understand what the requirements are for travelling to and from different destinations, so that they can pass that information on. And we've had over 92,000 launches of that plugin in the first few weeks of its launch. We also have a link to an airline safety tracker, and we also provide, through some of the other solutions on our desktop, we provide some rich content to allow airlines to explain what safety measures they're taking and pass that information along to the customer. And even with the hotels themselves as well, passing on that information at time of booking. So consumers really can have that confidence, because without that confidence that they're going to be safe on the trip and with the partners that they're booking, they're not going to take that journey. So they're really helping pass that on and feed the recovery.
Can I add to that? Can I add to that as well, Martin? Because I think our survey said very similar to your findings as well. Well, what I'm finding with organisations at the moment is they're really keen to understand the preparation side. So how do they make informed decisions on where is open, what are the immigration procedures and so on. So making sure they make the right decisions on what is permitted to travel and what is essential travel in their org, and then on the journey itself, making sure that they're receiving timely updates, normally through apps, etc., on what's going on. And with borders changing so rapidly, particularly in Europe, we've seen that recently, it's really important that we try and address not just the booking stage, but also that on-trip performance as well, I'd say. Okay,
fine, yes, and you mentioned Europe, Carl, and I feel we're in a bit of a mess here, because every time a traveller books a holiday, they find the day later that suddenly they're going to have to quarantine for 2 weeks coming back to the UK. Ankush, you're at the very sharp end, because you're selling travel to people. How are you coping with that?
So, Paul, the good thing is that knowing, and I'll talk about the Indian market in specific today, and as a citizen of this country, we are very resilient to viruses, etc. And I think people are very, very bold. The way what I've seen, especially in the last couple of months, I think people just want to get out and travel. There are so many inquiries, especially for short-haul destinations. And the first one, which obviously opened, was Dubai and Maldives. There's a lot of domestic holidays, be it by road or by airlines, is happening very regularly. However, it is all word of mouth what is being spread across. So whenever friends or travel partners are traveling, the question comes, was I quarantined? What happened at the airport when you landed? What was the policy? Were you harassed? Did it take a lot of time? Etc., etc. So I think that is where the only detriment what people are having. But if you see the load factors of most of the domestic airlines today, we're almost at 74-75%, right? Which is pretty good, keeping in mind the amount of cases which India has every day. So that is itself, it's a funny situation. On the one side, the numbers are obviously increasing. On the other side, the travelers are increasing. So I don't know which way we are going. But yes, the traffic is starting to move. People are discussing holidays now, especially now in October and December. But I think it will be more of short haul. And obviously, once the visas open, for Europe, etc., I'm sure people will be very, very hungry to go back to the skies. So I think it's more word of mouth, more than tech at the moment. People want to talk to their friends and their travel partner and get a little understanding on what's happening in that respective destination.
Well, I mean, you mentioned word of mouth, Ankush, but of course, a lot of the business that is done on the internet is actually supported by user-generated content and customer reviews. So I just wonder whether you all think there might be a role for technology to play in actually getting travelers to be able to not necessarily talk to each other, but actually put up messages that can raise confidence to travel. Any thoughts on that?
Definitely, yes, Paul. Everybody today will browse and search, but I somehow still feel, people still want to talk to the traveler, right? Be it their friends or whoever it might be. I think that gives you a real experience rather than seeing some comment which might be a third party or somebody else you don't know. I mean, that's what I would personally do, and I know many of my travel partners across the country have been talking to each other, right? And yes, you're reading a lot in the press, and sometimes to believe what is being written on the press also is sometimes whether it's actually authentic or not, can create doubts. But hearing somebody who actually traveled, like I'm traveling myself to Dubai end of this month, I've spoken to 10 friends, and I also represent Dubai tourism in India, right? That what was experience, etc. Right? So I think that will really give you more confidence.
Yes. So one thing that I mentioned, Martin and Carl, you remember when we were talking in the week, and Ankush, you didn't mention to join us, was actually whether there's a role for webcams at all in all this. So actually, travelers and tourists can see what's going on in hotels, maybe at airports as well, see other people traveling and think, well, they're doing it, why aren't we? Have you any thoughts on that at all, Carl or Martin?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's really important overall that we're giving as much information as possible to travellers. And if we think of Singapore at the moment, there's an SG Clean initiative, which is all of the hotels here are demonstrating very high standards of hygiene, cleanliness, to try and build that confidence back. So I think, having real-time information through a webcam, etc., is just another avenue of making sure that travellers feel confident in either the airlines that they're flying in or the hotels that they're staying in. Without that confidence, people will, particularly in the corporate travel world, people will hold back. I think on the leisure travel side, it's a little bit easier because you take that ultimate responsibility. But with organisations, they feel either in some countries there is actual legislation that means they've got to look after the safety of their travellers overseas, or there's just the ethical duty of an organisation to ensure that when their travellers are overseas, they're looked after. So I think that's going to really flavour how the return to corporate travel. I think corporate travel is going to come back later. I think everybody accepts that. But that's where I see the opportunities for leisure in particular, because, I think most of us are chomping at the bit to try and get back in the air and go overseas. Myself, probably more than anybody. So anything that would give me that information to justify and give me that confidence, I think is really, really vital.
Okay, Martin, I at an exhibition I was able to go to before lockdown. It was a business travel exhibition, but this is just as relevant to leisure travel as well. I saw a company providing mapping information on hotspots. Now, the hotspots that they were showing, because this was pre-COVID, were actually, I suppose, criminal hotspots. If you walk in a certain area of town, you're more likely to have your pocket picked. But that could work equally well to actually be mapping virus hotspots. Is that a role you think that technology might be able to help with?
I mean, I certainly think there's a lot of new and disruptive and interesting technologies out there. I mean, if the data points are there that can be relied upon with artificial intelligence and geolocating out there, I'm sure there's a niche out there for technology providers to look at that and adapt their technology and solutions. I think one of the challenges at the moment is just that regulatory environment and how people can move around, and getting more awareness out there and more understanding and more standardization. So with more standardization in the travel and understanding, again, the standardization of the data and what people need to do to travel from A to B, that will enable technology to become more integral in the process and support people, whether that's understanding what they need to do or areas to avoid in different countries. So yeah, technology can help, but initially I think the first stage we're still in is in this disruptive environment where there's constant change coming from a regulatory perspective, and we're supporting initiatives like the World Travel and Tourism Council's safety initiatives to try to standardise how countries and airlines are working together on these safety features that will really help, again, encourage people and enable more of a standardised experience for people to be able to commit to their travel.
Yes, and you're talking about coordination between governments. So we have some standardization, which is not really to do with technology, but would be very vital indeed. Ankush, there's a question here come from YouTube. I'll read it to you and see what you think. Particularly relevant to you because I think you have a lot of online sales. The question is, while tech will play a crucial role in restoring travel industry functions, what impact do you think tech will have on blue-collar travel jobs? There are concerns about too much tech replacing human beings. Very, very relevant possibly to your business. Any thoughts on that?
Good question, Paul. So I would say tech will definitely save a lot of cost when it comes to rentals/infrastructure. I think it's not going to replace the worker or the employment, what the question is, because somehow I feel that, I somehow see a shift happening towards the offline travel agents, especially post-COVID, because I think the customer confidence and the way the passenger was troubled, during especially April, March, when the borders were closed, they were kind of struggling and they wanted that phone or that email or whatever, or WhatsApp, they could speak to the travel fraternity. I think with their travel part agent, I would say, I think the employment on the operations on the will not suffer at all. Yeah, it will come back to hopefully normalcy by, I would say, Q1 next year. But yes, tech will definitely replace, some infrastructure point of view, because a lot of people who were kind of working from offices will start working from home, etc., etc. But I don't think there'll be any job losses as such, because the industry will come back. As I always say, there'll be revenge travel in India at least, And there's a big joke in my own company that, like you see buses in India where people are hanging, and trying to get in. It's going to happen 6 months when the guys will be standing on the wings, please take me. I think that's what will happen. I think it's a short-term problem, but I think it'll be back to job losses. I agree with you have happened, but I think it'll come back in the next 6 to 9 months.
I think I'd like to add to that. And so I think technology there is what are those people actually doing? So to add to Ankush's comments is to say that really, what do you want those travel consultants to be doing? They want to be engaging with the customer. They want to be giving them the right information. They want to be supporting them. But there's a lot of functions that today technology can help with. So today there's a lot of changes going on, changing bookings, reissuing tickets. That's quite a lengthy, time-consuming process, and that's something that absolutely technology can help with. And it'll just change the focus for what people are doing as part of their job to being more customer-centric, supporting the customer better, perhaps selling them more products which drive revenue for the travel agency, but trying to take away some of that pain and processing, which absolutely is what technology is for.
Yeah, and can I add to both? I fully agree with both Ankush's and Martin's comments there. I think from a corporate perspective side, particularly, there's a realization that if you move things offline and you need that extra support, you're going to have to be charged for it. And I think there's never before been a reason to be so reliant on a TMC as before. So when I've spoken to some customers, initially they said, "Oh, this is the death of the TMCs," and certainly from a revenue and P&L point of view, it's very, very difficult for them right now. But going forward, for me, I would far prefer, if I was a leisure traveller or a corporate traveller, to have booked my ticket with a reputable travel agency, and then if things change, I can email from that location if I'm overseas, rather than try and deal with an airline or hotel help desk. I've had that before on business trips where people around me have booked direct and they can't get change on tickets. I think that's going to be really, really relevant to the TMC world going forward, which is great. And to your point, I do think things will recover, and when they do, that value added service that a TMC provides will be really important.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what we're talking about then is in a low margin industry, because travel is a low margin industry, we're talking about using technology to raise efficiency and actually get more utilization out of our staff, who instead of becoming booking clerks doing repetitive machine type work, they actually become travel advisors on the end of the phone or email to actually help our customers. Ankush, in your business, have you found across the years that the nature of the work that your staff do is changing more from a mundane non-automation role to becoming more advisory and helping customers more?
So for me, our customer is the travel agent, Paul, and fortunately they are pretty well versed in what's happening. But the good thing is, because the travelers are evolving, the travel agents are evolving, and they make sure that we keep evolving ourselves. So be it product lines, be it technology, be it getting better systems to serve them better. I think that's something which we have come up the curve for the last 15 years. And what we were doing in 2005 is extremely different than what we're doing today. It's because the traveler has made the travel agent evolve, and that's what I think we have been completely focusing, working with our partners, and ensure that we keep building the tech to be fighting this competitive world, especially with the large OTAs. Yeah.
I think as well, I agree. I think it's accelerated a process that began probably about 18 months, 2 years ago in India, which was a shift towards offline to online. So some of the more mundane tickets, point to point, very easy, are being done much more online. In the corporate travel world, if you'd have asked me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 to 15% online penetration, i.e. 90% of tickets more or less were booked offline. That shifted even last year to much more around 40, 50%. So I think this is going to accelerate it when things start to return to normal. And to your point, it's going to make the travel counsellors be much more of that sort of service orientated, but the basic stuff can be done online. There's no need to necessarily use a travel counsellor for that value added service.
So actually, travel counsellors, as we'll call them, are actually dealing now with the higher margin travel rather than the mundane, say, short haul flights where they're not needed.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, Martin, you probably see it with Travelport as well, don't you? With regards to the sort of the change in needs of a travel counsellor.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't argue with anything you've said there, Cole. I think what we're seeing as well with COVID is a lot more changes in servicing and last minute changes. The airlines are doing schedule changes. So you're seeing some trends like airlines in the US dropping change fees. You're seeing travel consultants having to be much more engaged in managing those ever-changing itineraries. So a lot more of their time and focus is around supporting the customer and more like after-sales care, albeit still or in-trip care, if you like. So the role of a travel consultant as counsellor has definitely shifted in terms of supporting in this new environment and this new world here. Even with Air India, with their new Maharaj affairs, they're very open for changes versus previous tickets, where if you could find the seats. So that it's really changed the dynamic of how people look at their travel consultants for that.
And I think it's important to remember when we say complex, I would picture it domestic and international, right? The international trip's much more complex. Visa requirements may change. Visa requirements may even change, not just by your destination and origin, but by your nationality from there. So, for instance, if I leave Singapore and try and go to China, I'm a British national. That is a very different set of rules than if I was a Singaporean citizen, for instance. So it's really important on the international side to use to look at using travel counsellors for information. But I think domestic tourism and domestic travel can be also served relatively simply with online tools.
Okay, I know in the UK here that a lot of people who used to work in offices are now working from home, and there's a business here that specialises in cloud communications. That's telephony, but routed over the internet. Do you see that the use of cloud communication technology to actually keep people working from home rather than coming into the office might be the way forward for travel businesses, in fact, many office-based businesses? Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I'll just begin. I definitely. I mean, look at our gathering here. Right, last year we were fortunate enough to be face to face. This year, it's virtual, but it's still meaningful. I think technology has advanced rapidly over the past year to accommodate, particularly video calls, in an easy fashion. If you'd have gone back 10 years, and it was back in the teleconference room in your office, if you had one, it was expensive. You had to book it. We've come a long way, and I think it does offer an alternative to travel. But I think, Ankush, you mentioned earlier, there is still that need for face-to-face, particularly on complex deals, for instance, if you're trying to sell, or more cultural understanding and really be developing that, particularly in Asia-Pacific region, which is so diverse culturally. So I think there's going to be that balance between, yes, technology is there, but it can't replace all forms of travel, I wouldn't have thought.
Ankush, the travel agents you deal with, are you finding that they are, I suppose, leaving their retail units behind, operating more from a home office and using cloud communications to do that?
So, Paul, I think at least till the market doesn't come back to 80% levels, a lot of them are working from home, and I think that's going to work in their favor, keeping in mind costs low, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when the business is back to normal, hopefully a year from now, everybody will be back to their offices, because it's not only just talking to the customer, it's also finance, accounting, etc. Right? I mean, so I think it's not going to replace. I mean, technology, cloud will not replace the offices opening back. And companies like us, like today, my tech team is completely at home right now because they're building tech, so it's okay. They don't have any interfere. I mean, they have no interaction with the customers, right? But all our commercial teams today are back at work. In spite of all the cases what we have in India, because I think what you can do on your own seat, meeting your colleagues, I think nothing can replace that, be it any virtual meeting, I think so. But I think for the short term, definitely many travel companies will work from home. Absolutely. Are working as well. Yeah.
I mean, I'd answer it in a two-part way. Yeah, absolutely. From within the industry and how travel businesses operate, it can offer a lot more flexibility. The technology is there now. We historically perhaps have had very crowded call center spaces, that kind of thing. We can now have a lot more flexibility, and the technology that we're delivering to travel agencies is enabling that and embracing that change. And I think that can be very positive from an internal industry point of view. And it can also help us attract and retain talent against other industries who perhaps historically have offered more flexibility. From a travel demand point of view, and as cloud suppressing demand, I still think that will be outweighed by the underlying demographics around the world. I mean, more people, particularly in the Asia region, are moving into the middle class. World Economic Forum estimates 2 billion Asians currently in the middle class, and that's going to grow 75% in the next 10 years. So as people become more economically independent and move into that middle class, they want to travel more, they're doing business more, they're going on more holidays and trips, and travel's quite aspirational. So there's going to be that huge underlying demand that still keeps coming and growing within the industry that needs to be served. So I think the travel industry as a whole is in a very healthy place going forward, regardless of these complementary technologies for connecting.
Okay, we have another question from our audience, guys. The question is, how the new normal could support the event planners at international level? Now, that's a tricky one. Have you got any thoughts on that? Any of you? We're talking about event planners at the international level. So there are conferences that I would be moderating or chairing and not happening. How can the new normal support that?
I mean, we could spend an hour arguing what the new normal would be and what is the new normal. I think technology and what we talked about already in terms of having the information to event planners just as much as to the travel coordinators, so that they can make intelligent decisions. Are they picking the right destination for hosting? Are they able to get the people in that they want from the countries they want? Are those borders open? And providing all of that information and framework to them is going to be pivotal in terms of that industry starting to recover and come back up.
Yes, this is a very difficult area, because if you're event planning an international event, you might be working 1 year out, starting to put an event together. I don't know, Carl or Ankush, whether you have any thoughts on this at all.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Martin said. I think the challenge is going to be that logistical one of exactly as Martin just covered there. Can you actually physically get those people in, the nationality of your people, etc., which is, always been an event consideration, but I think will be even more heightened. And then again, to your point there, planning meetings a year out. Now, normally that's because it's hard to get certain locations, right? But I don't think at the moment those locations would be as difficult as they were in the past because of cancellation. So that may be a glimmer of hope, a silver lining, I suppose, in terms of some of the preparation. But yeah, I sadly think we're still a long way off the return of full events right now, just because companies are just so reluctant to, and there's a real concern that they will put their employees into some form of danger, and that may be right or wrong, but I think that's a really strong sentiment right now.
Okay, here's another question for us. What could possibly be some of the pitfalls of the increasing role of tech in travel in post-COVID times? So we're talking about moving beyond the times that we are in now, and with the increasing role of tech in travel, are there any pitfalls that you can think of, or is tech going to be all good for travel? Ankush, any thoughts on that at all?
Well, I think you can never replace. As I always say, the tech and the offline needs to coexist, and that's the way it has been, and especially with complex itineraries. And India, obviously, in a very unique, is a unique market, right? So I think a lot of browsing will happen on the tech, as they say, but the look is going to happen, but the book will still happen offline. And if you see, in spite of having a lot of online, most of the business in India, a little more than 80% is still offline, and this was pre-COVID. So I somehow feel there might be a couple of percentage points which will probably go in the favor of offline, but definitely, it's there to coexist. But only technology will be, I would say, a better enabler for the world, for the travel fraternity to get more access to things which probably they couldn't do. But the fulfillment will still happen through the travel counselor or the travel companies. Especially post-COVID.
Yep. So you're seeing technology post-COVID as an enabler, and you're not actually seeing any pitfalls at all. Martin and Carl, you're both tech-led organisations. Any pitfalls that you could foresee in using tech?
I think there's a lot of benefits from technology in general. I think that some of the pitfalls will be more general in terms of rushed integrations or poorly planned or thought through integrations, and perhaps rushed tech. I think perhaps the biggest danger of COVID is that it might cause some businesses to overreact or overly rush some implementations and get them right, and they could be then damaging to their business in terms of the impacts of that, poor security, all of those sorts of things. So I think some of the pitfalls are more generic. I suppose COVID could just make people a little bit more rushed in how they approach some of those things, and don't really truly think through how they're approaching the use and integration of tech, and how that aligns to, as Ankush said, how that aligns to their existing business and people and staff.
Yeah, yes. I think the only other thing I can add is I think probably one of the pitfalls is more the limitation of tech, and I think some of the conversations I've had with customers has been this desire that tech will solve all ills, and will be perfect. And it's really difficult with such a different sources of information, and B, the changeability of that information, to have tech as the silver bullet to fix it all. So I think that limitation is one. And I echo what Martin said about rushed implementations. I think as well, there's also areas where companies need to be open to changes in process in the future. So their processes can't just be lifted and shifted into a new tech world. It's being open-minded enough to adapt, because tech, it is a great tool, but ultimately it does always have some limitations. So I think just being pragmatic enough to accept that, I think, is the pitfall, I would say.
And I think it would be to take the opportunity that COVID presented, if you're making those changes, to make the restructuring in your company, changes to processes that make sense, and to take that opportunity to refocus the business so that you come out stronger. Would be the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd reflect that. The technology projects I've been involved in with travel companies are normally fairly tight on staffing, and they don't realise when implementing new technology just how much additional resources needed to actually make a tech project a success. So one of the pitfalls in tech is that it can be hugely diversionary from your day-to-day work, or if you focus too much on your day-to-day work, then the tech project is going to fail. So those are a couple of tricky areas. And actually right now I'm involved with a few projects where we're using these quiet COVID times to actually have the resource available to implement new technology. We've got about 5 minutes to run now on our session, and maybe I could just ask each of you in turn whether there's some advice or thoughts that you can give to everybody who's tuning in with us on what they might do tech-wise to really try and help in these tricky situations. Carl, let me start with you.
Yeah, I think what's becoming clear in my conversations with clients at the moment is, and Martin just touched on it, using this as an opportunity to review what you currently do and think about where you want to be in a year's time, anticipate what post-COVID travel will look like, and then try and review what you currently have and make the changes now while things are relatively quiet to do so. So I think that's my number one bit of advice. The other element linked to that is we're seeing a lot of change around pre-trip approval and defining what is permissible travel. Permissible being what's allowed by your organization on its whole. Another one is what the employee appetite is, and finally what the government of origin and destination allow. So again, companies are using this as an opportunity much more to review their approvals process for travel. So again, that's something that I would advise people listening, if you're a corporate travel manager, procurement head, etc., think about that element of how do you resolve that and get that done now.
Thank you. Martin, your thoughts?
It's very similar. Like I said, Travelport want to emerge from this a stronger organisation and business than before, and so how we've approached that is to double down and accelerate the work and efforts we're doing on the key technologies for the future. We believe more in the retailing and the role of the travel counsellor changing in this consultative way and needing information about retailing and suppliers needing to give all of that information there. So we're doubling down on that change in the industry, whilst paring back and perhaps not stripping away some of the things that we didn't need to do or are less focused on that longer term goals, that while there's less demand for those items and those older technologies. So yeah, it really is about accelerating that and taking the company forward in a better way. And I think that's really the opportunity for most companies out there, is to use this lower transactional volume, this lower throughput to actually make the changes to the systems and bed those down ready for when it all comes back.
Fine, thank you. Ankush, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, Paul, I would, regarding tech, I would definitely suggest and urge everybody to actually become better sellers of their products and itineraries. I think there are some amazing virtual courses available of destinations, activities, hotels, where they can or they can ask their colleagues and staff to actually go to these during these times. So when the market bounces back, they're better sellers because people today are getting smarter and they will obviously have many questions to ask you. So I think that's a great time for us to educate ourselves, and being a better hotel planner, holiday planners. Second, which is non-tech advice, I think don't put all your, you just don't focus on one business now. I think everybody has to start looking at different travel avenues or revenue avenues, I would say. So don't, as I said, don't put all your eggs in the same basket. I would say no, put your eggs in different baskets. Because tomorrow if there is a COVID again, one should not be dependent on one particular champion of what she or he is, right? I think that's something which is a good learning, especially for a company like us. We're obviously expanding like this now at different when it comes to products rather than just building our core. Because God forbid something happens again 5 years from now, we should be pretty sorted with our cash flows and revenues. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent, gentlemen. Martin, Carl, and Ankush, thank you very much for a great session. And thank you to you for actually joining us on YouTube. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.